team is back. We've got Johnny, who's going to try and behave himself. He's actually in the office for once, not the little narrow room that he normally speaks in. We've got Jenny, who's moved to a different room, but is looking wonderfully lovely as ever and can't say anything nasty about anyone, so we've not given her the hypocrite this month. Vicky Slade can't even cope with uttering the names of the people that are going to be brought up later, so she's palmed it off onto Johnny and Keith. And then we've got the professor, whose wife's out, so there'll be no cups of tea and no cake delivered halfway through the webinar. And to especially join us, we have Rob Boughton, because we're going to be talking about houses, and Rob knows all about houses, but has an extraordinary take on it, which we're going to be nice to him at some of the discussion as he tells us all about his work. So that's the environment has ever done for us, and we're hoping that you'll join in with us as we go through it. So to kick off, Jenny, I've done my 2 minutes of warm-up. It's now going to go to Rob and to Vicky, who are going to I'm just making Jenny look really panicky there. So we're going to go to Vicky.
Thanks, Nick.
Go straight into talking to Rob about housing in this new world that we're all getting used to.
Thank you, Nick. So Rob and I, we discovered over the weekend in doing a little bit of research, we have a shared history in that we both worked for one of the biggest estate agents in the country at about the same time. It seems that our paths didn't cross, as I was southwest and he was southeast, but I'm sure there was some boozy work do that we probably both went on. I recall a few sort of alcohol-induced limousine trips to London that I'm sure Rob had his fair share of. And in fact, my best one of that was I actually did lunch in Jersey once. We were flown to Jersey for lunch. So Rob never did that.
No, we were never quite that extravagant, no.
Oh dear, see, we spent all the profits and you obviously invested yours and turned it into your wonderful business. So Rob Boughton, for those of you who don't know, is the chief exec of Thakeham, which is a developer based in the southeast. And one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to Rob is that Rob has a brilliant story to tell on net zero homes. So I'm encouraging my colleagues to join in with their challenging questions for Rob. But I just want to start by Rob, take us a bit through. Thakeham has grown sort of quite rapidly over the last few years, but your sort of commitment to net zero is possibly one of the strongest that I've seen in housing developers and carbon zero. You know, they don't think about the two, but you've really gone hell for leather on that. Why is net zero so important to you?
So I think fundamentally net zero should be really important to all of us, and it's certainly, I think, going to increasingly be so. I think clearly in advance of COP26 we're going to see far more mention of this. We as a business and I as an individual, a few years ago now, probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, started to really think about it, and part of that was driven by my kids. You know, asking what we were doing, you know, what were we up to, what were we driving, you know, they were talking about, you know, plastic pollution in the Pacific and a variety of other things. I think we saw the rise of Extinction Rebellion as well, and that made us really think about where we should be going and what we should be doing. We saw what the government was doing with the automotive industry, and we felt rather than be told, we should lead that pace. So we made a commitment publicly at the start of January 2020 that every home that we deliver will be zero carbon in lifetime use from 2025. It will be carbon neutral in production from 2025. We will be zero carbon as a business by 2025. And finally, we would lead the charge on zero carbon placemaking as well. And that's what we've set out. And we're well on our way now, I think, to achieving that. So, yeah, it's going well.
You talk about zero carbon placemaking. So one of the things which, whenever you talk to a developer, I mean, obviously I'm a local councillor, and councillors and developers tend to have quite a tricky relationship, because typically a councillor is trying to defend the existing community from a nasty developer who's going to move in and pave over everything. But the developer's got this responsibility primarily to the people moving into the development. How do you square the circle of saying, look, how do you make that developer the friend to the existing community and not not just the sort of person that builds pretty houses for new people to move into.
I think we took some learning out of the NHS England Healthy New Towns on this about how to behave and what to think about, and that was back in 2017, 2018, and then we've moved through on a journey then of being infrastructure led and finally to where we are on net zero now. And I think my experience is that predominantly people, particularly in the southeast, understand the need for housing. We all know there's not enough of it. We know we need more of it. But at a local level, we tend to find the same criticism most times, and that is that we're going to put more cars on the roads and make traffic jams worse. We're going to take up these school places, and none of those exist. And we already wait a week at the doctor's surgery. You're going to make it 2. This goes on, and I think unless we can go in there and right from day one show a really positive spin and a positive impact on that, and make positive change. So deliver schools, deliver healthcare facilities, deliver road improvements as it was traditionally. Then unless we can do that, we're never going to win people over locally. And I think more than that now, we are starting to really see more and more as we've engaged on zero carbon and on biodiversity net gain, actually, the two subjects come intrinsically linked, that people are really interested in that, and they're starting to really care about that, and that's starting to push up the list as well. So when we go in and say, look, yes, we want to deliver homes, we want to deliver houses, new community, whatever, but we're going to do it doing all of these things, and we're going to do those things right at the start, people tend to get it. And I think that's what's important. Now, we have to see a sea change. Our industry, I firmly believe that our industry for too many years has run viability exercises, has tried to do whatever to get rid of their obligations and just maximise the profit. And we can't do that and expect the people to put up with it. It's the wrong thing to do. We've never done that. We've never run a viability exercise. We've never built anything that wasn't policy compliant, affordable housing and 10-year blind. And I think if you've got the right modus operandi, then you can start to work zero carbon and biodiversity net gain into that as well. But you've got to do it from the start, and you've got to really believe it and mean it and show people you can actually deliver it. I think that's key.
If you were giving some advice, because to me it's about trust. I think typically communities don't trust developers. If a developer says, we're going to build you a new community centre, what the community thinks is they're going to tell us they're going to build us a new community centre, and they're going to build a load of rabbit hutches, and then at the end of it, if there's any money left, you'll get a shed in on a bit of green. How do you change that? What's the key to helping residents believe and trust? And how do you as a rep, because you're an NHBC 5-star builder, you're on all these sort of task forces, how do you influence other developers to get on that journey with you?
I mean, you're right. So we sit on the HBF, the House Builders Federation's Future Homes Task Force. That's the bit that's really driving the change with government, and we sit alongside, there's 3 developers on that representing different sizes, and actually, we have to demonstrate what can be achieved. We have to demonstrate that it can be done, and that's via exemplars and pilot schemes. But we have to show the others that you need to behave differently. You've got to change, and if you're not prepared to, then there are choices. And I think the only way, unless the government legislates, the only way for us to move that change is to show it can be done, show that it's achievable and deliverable, and that the councillors have a choice. And I'm a firm believer that if a council has a good 5-year supply, they can start to dictate. Why not be saying I want 20% biodiversity net gain rather than 10? Why not be saying that I want infrastructure at these points in the development rather than at the end and then it's never delivered because they argue their way out of it? Link it properly into a 106 so it has to be delivered. We usually sit there and volunteer. I mean, I've had arguments with councillors where they've just not believed it. We said put it in the 106 and they can't believe we're saying it because that's not the norm. But we will do it. We will deliver it early. At our flagship Peace Pottage development, we delivered £7 million worth of off-site highways improvements before the first person moved in. We're delivering a primary school 2.5 years into the development. It's just not heard of. Most people push it out to the end, but you've got to do it. You've got to mean it, and you've got to deliver it. It's the only way to win people over.
Because there's that added sort of confusion, isn't there? So if you're building a big development, and some of your developments, they're getting big because it's about zero carbon communities, so you're trying to deliver the whole thing. In theory, it's quite easy, relatively, to promise millions of pounds worth of infrastructure if you're building thousands of homes. At the moment, if you're building 40, 50, 100 homes, typically that's a financial contribution that then goes to a council, and then the council decides to spend it on something else, and actually that's that's really damaging, surely, because as a developer, you need to control that. But the very nature of what you're trying to develop is you can only deliver the stuff direct if it's a big development. So how do you scale that down? Because I can see how you scale it up, but I don't see how you scale it down.
No, you're right. It's a real challenge, and you're absolutely right. So where we've got these bigger developments, new garden villages, etc., where there's thousands of units, yes, we can create community. We can build the schools, we can build all the places, we can lay it out so that cycle and pedestrian have all of the access and the rights, and the roads become very secondary, and the car becomes very secondary, etc. It's very easy to create a proper zero carbon environment there and make it work. It becomes far more difficult when you scale that down to smaller, because there's just not so much money in the pot. You're absolutely right. And it's proportional, of course. I think the danger, and you hit the nail on the head, the danger is that we pay the money to a local council for something, and it never then gets delivered. And we have to see a joint aptitude from both parties here, from the developer and from the local authority, to want to change that and want to move it forward. We've got schemes at the moment, smaller schemes, where we're exploring perhaps reprofiling and changing the road from our development into the village centre, and starting to look at bringing bigger cycle pedestrian routes in there and working with the council to do that. But we do need, in most cases, we need the county on side, the district or borough council on side, and probably even a parish council on side. And you're aware, joining all of those people up and getting that to happen can be a challenge at times. So we have the aptitude. I'm not suggesting every developer does, but we have the aptitude to try and do that. We want to see that change on smaller schemes, not just on larger schemes, but it is far more difficult. And the worst thing for me is giving money across and then never seeing what we should be delivered. And I've seen schemes where it was never delivered, and the developers have gone and taken the 106 money back after 10 years because they're entitled to. That should never happen. It's cardinal sin. It's very bad management on all parts. Yeah, definitely.
And you talk about you don't run a financial viability in terms of delivering your infrastructure, but what about the viability of development? The financial model around building and the government finance and the funding models, that's really shifting. Where do you think it's going, and how do you plan for something where the sands are shifting underneath us all the time? The screws are tightening on the net zero. The planning policy is changing. How do you manage to plan a development that might take you 5 years, 10 years, or longer when you don't know what's going to be happening at the next Parliament?
I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think that's always been the case, hasn't it? As long as we live in a system where the government has the control over planning to the degree it does, they can move things around, they can move. The economic situation allows greater amounts of money to go in at one point than others, etc., etc. But fundamentally, it's an age-old argument, and some refer to it as land value capture, some refer to it by other means. But there is only so much money in the pot, and unless a government or a local authority or somebody else is prepared to inject money in, we are in a position where we have to make it all add up, and the gross development value, what we sell everything for, is one figure. Off that must come a fair profit for us because we're taking the risk. Then there's the cost of the build, and there's the cost of the infrastructure delivery, and what's left is the land value. And I think traditionally where it's been tripped up and where people have run viabilities is where the agreement with the landowner has meant they have or are going to pay way too much for the land. And we're very clear. We say to our landowners, if you want to go with somebody who's going to pay you huge amounts for your land, go and find somebody else. But if you want somebody who's going to increase your land value quite dramatically, but at the same point in time, do the right thing, deliver the infrastructure, deliver the zero carbon, etc., the biodiversity gain, and really have the right impact on this planet, then it's us. But you won't get anywhere near as much as if you're going to somebody that's not going to deliver any of that and just run a viability exercise, clearly. But then we think it's the right way to do it. We think the local authorities who increasingly work with appreciate that and like that as well, and it fits with them, and we're working with a number of organisations to create the right communities. We work with the Plunkett Foundation, which are a charity that have been going for over 100 years, the usual go-to people for communities that are losing a pub or a shop. They go in, help them set up a community trust and then raise the funds. In our case, we pay for the facilities, gift it into a community trust, they set it up for us and help us with that. We're working with the county council at the moment on how good community creation can address social and health inequality. It's not the norm for a developer, I appreciate that. I'm not sure all the PLCs will be signing up that tomorrow. But if we do it and prove it can be done, then it puts pressure on others to do it, and I think that's quite important. But we all need to want the same thing, and that includes local authorities as well as us developers, definitely.
Thakeham was the first SME house builders to sign the Race to Zero, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the next couple of years we're going to start seeing councils and other organisations say we're only working with people who are signed up to maybe not that scheme, but to that zero carbon? Is there a business reason as well as a moral and future proofing reason to actually say all these councils are going to say go away and come back when you are serious about zero carbon?
Well, I think it's not just councils; it's also the end user, the customer, the buyer, and there is a lot of talk now about borrowing commercially for developers, but also borrowing domestically for house buyers, that you would get a different mortgage rate if you buy a zero carbon product to if you don't. And fundamentally, the population has the ability to vote with its feet. And if you've got two developments that are the same price, and that one's zero carbon and that one's not, and you're going to get a mortgage rate that's 1% cheaper than the one that's zero carbon, surely that's going to make a difference to you. That's going to make you think about what you want to do. So yes, you want to do the right thing, but you're not prepared to pay more for it. But if you do the right thing and then you save money as well, then that's got to be a good thing. So I think there's that. I think we're seeing the funding, increasing the talk of funding coming through Homes England, but for both housing associations and infrastructure funding and general funding for developers. The march towards zero carbon, they're pushing the boundaries there. It has to be linked to green, it has to be linked to biodiversity, it has to be linked to zero carbon as well there. And I think yes, the government can legislate, or effectively local authorities can legislate locally by saying, we will only have this in our plan, we'll only do this, etc., etc. But also, I think a lot of it, which is driven by the consumer, and I think the consumer will A, expect it, B, want it, and if there's a financial benefit for them as well on cheaper mortgages, is there a two-tone council tax? A two-tier council tax, whereby fundamentally, if you buy a new home that's not zero carbon, you get taxed more money. Why not?
They do it with cars, don't we?
That's my point. My electric car doesn't have any road fund vehicle license on it. You buy a petrol diesel car, it does. So why not do the same with houses? I mean, I appreciate that's unfair to people living in existing houses, but when the flow of money and the availability to convert those properties becomes there, but on new properties, certainly, perhaps not now, but new properties perhaps from 25 onwards, why shouldn't there be a difference in tax? Why shouldn't there be an incentive, a proper incentive for people to make that choice? Because ultimately, if people make that choice, we, the deliverer, the developer, should be giving people what they want. And I think that's important.
But that also works. The opportunity is in the stamp duty, isn't it? That if you're buying a house that's got zero carbon properties, then you can benefit that. And there is a way, which we're not going to deal with today, with the decarbonisation, that certificates could be issued to older houses, and they can also benefit from the same thing if they can prove that they've taken steps to decarbonate. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. We've got to, fundamentally, from a government and local authority point of view, we can incentivise people or we can tax them, surely, in this country. And there exists that opportunity. And I think, we need to, if we're really serious about it, we need to push. But also, I think we as developers, we have an obligation. And actually, I'm pleased that the HBF is taking it so seriously and moving it forward so rapidly, I have to say. I think they're working hard to make this work as well. So, yeah.
Rob, it's Keith here. We've been talking about the impact of moving housing towards net zero models and new communities towards net zero models for some time. And one of the issues that has cropped up and seems to be becoming more of a discussion topic is the importance of long-term custodianship of land, as opposed to, if I could put it this way, get in and out quickly at the beginning. Not least of all because the way in which things will be changing over time will need longer-term management of demand, and even taking of revenue. Is that something you're seeing changing in the housing market now, in the way that developers are behaving?
I'm not so sure I'm seeing it change now. We're trying to move that change. You're absolutely right. And I think there's a couple of things there. Firstly, I touched earlier on community creation. So for me, we've got communities where we are delivering a village shop, a village cafe, a WeWork facility, desk space, meeting room space, touch laboratory space. But rather than give that village shop on a commercial lease, we're gifting all those facilities into a community trust. that's owned and run by the community, set up by the Plunkett Foundation. So it guarantees that in perpetuity. Now, it's got a far greater chance of success than a commercial business coming in and saying, well, there's not enough patches, not enough footfall through there, we're going to close the shop, we're not going to run that facility, etc. I think you're absolutely right. When you start to particularly, and I think we've seen it previously, some of the post-war and pre-war garden villages, towns that were delivered, we've seen the green spaces in there become a burden and an opportunity to local authorities in terms of they were designed, wonderfully laid out with these great green spaces. Now the green space has to be maintained and the funding wasn't put in place long term to do so. And secondly, of course, there's a development opportunity in the land value for the local authority in developing it out. So they're now selling these parcels off, developing them out, and that completely changes the vision that was set out originally for that space. And we need to find a way, absolutely, to stop that happening. We believe it is in gifting it into some form of community trust or some form of wildlife trust where it's absolutely protected in perpetuity. And if we can't do that, unfortunately, I think the pressure put on local authorities and the opportunities created by those bits have meant that they've been eroded. And we can't let that happen. We've got to design and deliver these places with that staying there in perpetuity, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean the same is true potentially of things like I've always been very attracted by the Vauban model in Freiburg, where renewable energy, income from renewable energy was used to generate upfront investment in transport. That kind of rethinking rather than big capital investments in increasing capacity for a highway movement that some would argue potentially. Can we replace that model with a more sort of longer term think through how all that works?
So it does require a little bit of radical thinking, but like many of these things, the answers do exist around the world in other places. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think we need to be more prepared to embrace that in the UK. It's there's some real lessons and easy lessons to be learned. One of the things that was we've started to really explore zero carbon placemaking, community creation. You end up going back in time. Because, places that, small reservoirs that served smaller areas were, of course, quite common 50 or 70 years ago. And yet one of the most carbon intensive things we do in this country is pump our clean water supply round the countryside for miles and miles. Why, and yet on our developments, we then spend huge amounts of money creating these wonderful sustainable drainage solutions to hold the water and let it dissipate gently. Why not capture some of that, purify it on site and pump it around the houses? Far less carbon intensive, far more economically viable. But it just requires a bit of thinking, and yet we did this 50, 70 years ago. The same is true of power generation. If we're putting PV panels across all of our homes and all of our commercial space, why not have that supply go back to a battery park on the edges of our development and then put it back out across, flattening supply and making it far more efficient? And finally, actually creating community in terms of the opportunities. Imagine going to a village shop and going in and purchasing something, then at 4 o'clock when the kids break up from school, some of the kids they get on their bike and get paid for dropping your shopping around the houses. Oh, hang on a second, didn't butchers have butchers' boys on butchers' bike 50, 70 years ago as well? And you suddenly realise that what you're doing is you're going back to what existed perhaps before the car or in different times, and you're re-employing some of those models to create that community. And I think there's lessons to be learned for us there. The answers exist, perhaps in other places around the world now, but also in times gone by. We need to be re-employing them now.
Yeah, and that returns me to, sorry, Vicky, just to finish that circle. The circular argument then is you have an absolute requirement to sell houses to customers.
Yeah.
And something that we've heard as working in your sector for a long time is, well, we've got to design and build a product that our customers want, and our customers want 2 cars on the drive. They want, all of the conveniences of modern living. And actually what we're talking about is sort of returning to a point where actually they're not quite sure what that means. And, the return to the butcher's boy, if I could put it that way, is that really something that the market will sustain? And how do we tell it to them?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting piece that we're going. And we don't think so. Countrywide suggested their development in Essex, where there's a big car park on the edge and then you park there and you go. We don't think we're quite ready for that yet as a nation. But one of the things that we took out of Healthy New Towns NHS England scheme was you need to educate people. And it needs to start the day they move into the new place. So, you've got to make it incredibly easy. You've got to educate from day one. And if you do that, you can change habitual behaviour. So for us, we think people will move in with their 2 security blankets, 2 cars, but if we can get them to change early doors, but how do we do that? So do we spin it round? So at the front of the properties, there's pedestrian and there's cycle paths, and there's a one-way service road that serves garages at the bottom of the garden, or something like parking at the bottom of the garden that takes you longer to move them out, etc. Do we give everybody that moves in for £1 a year an e-bike for everybody in the family, so they all have one, and make it very convenient at the front to do that? Do we give them access and perhaps 3 or 5 goes to join the Enterprise Car Club or Urban Mobility Partnership, so that when they do want a vehicle, they can rent the one that's fit for purpose, but the rest of the time they're using their e-bikes to move around, etc., etc. We've got to give them that opportunity, create it for them, show them how to use it, get them comfortable with it, and then we believe that people will probably go within 6 months from 2 security blankets to 1 security blanket. And then it might take time. It might be another 5 years before they lose the other security blanket and they're down to no cars. And one of the things that we're building is how do we then repatriate that space that we use for parking for roads now in 15 years' time? Because we know it's going to be a different environment there. So how do we look at that and how do we deal with that? And that's one of the things that we're working through at the moment, certainly.
Yeah. I find that sort of relationship between you as developer and the house owners as customers is almost the central challenge, which government, what could government do to incentivize developers to work with their customers in a way that would start resolving some of those things? Because that there's all sorts of other barriers, I'm sure, that we can be talking about, but ultimately people need to buy the houses that mean a change in their own behaviour at some point down the line.
Yeah, and I think our feeling is that the research we've done, people potentially want to change, but we need to make it very easy and we need to educate. And if we can do that and start to get people on that journey, then it will perpetuate more as it goes through time, certainly. But there's a big piece in there, and we're pushing the boundaries on that, and hopefully that will bear fruit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's an area that this podcast is going to be looking at some point in the future, Nick, isn't it? Education and skills, but it does seem to us to be a critical area that we ought to be talking about.
I think there's an interesting lesson coming off the back of COVID as well, in terms of where people are moving to now, how they're behaving, and what they want. And one of the things that we believe is that actually when you start to introduce those community values and those community places, when you start to create the opportunity for the kids after school to go and deliver the shopping and pay them to do so, and they mix with the volunteers that are, and I always use the made up example of Ethel, my 78-year-old, who's bought a bungalow on the development of volunteers 3 mornings a week in the shop, and then she doesn't turn up one day. The community notice. It's proper community, isn't it? It's people interacting with each other. It's the kid on the bike that knocks on the doors, delivers the shopping, says, "Hi, how are you?" Does this always happen now? I'm not so sure it does. So, we believe that people actually will want to be in a place where there's great brand new schools, there's all those community facilities, there's everything on tap, and they can move around safely. We always say it's like the centre parks for housing. So if that's interesting, centre parks clearly must be doing something right, because they've got 98, 99% take up. And people love going there because there's no cars. We get to move around on bikes and by pedestrian means. So why not create that in everyday life? Why not create the opportunity?
Johnny,
I was just going to come in, Rob, on the skills bit, which is something, and I always look to Vicky at this point. It's something that comes up in every single webcast that we do, is the skills agenda, and you talk very eloquently about how to educate the future owners and tenants of new development. What's your views on educating throughout the entire system, from the master planners, the architects, through to the technical consultants, all the way through to that process, including the local authorities? Not least, a lot of that infrastructure you're talking about, the decentralised infrastructure from a water point of view, energy decentralised infrastructure. This has been around for a very long time. It's always fallen on the rocks of liability and risk, which is why the industry forms back to norm. What's your view, and how are you going about educating the entire system that goes around master planning?
Well, it's a bit of a crusade, so we're on that one. So I think firstly, the interesting one is sitting on the HBF Future Homes Task Force. We sit alongside on there. One of my contemporaries is the Chief Exec of Ofwat. We've got DEFRA in there. We've got Bays in there. We've got a variety of those people in there. And we've presented to Bays. We've presented to DEFRA. We've presented to the policymakers on biodiversity and we've presented to the people at Bays with regard to energy. We've presented to DEFRA with regard to water. And actually, it seems to be getting a lot of traction. You know, there's a lot of this country where we are trying to develop that has quite major water supply problems, not least East Anglia, not least a lot of the Thames region as well. And yet the answers exist. It's falling out the sky on a daily basis. You know, it's quite crazy. And as you say, we used to do it years ago. I think in terms of educating across the board, you know, we were asked and worked with the ACE, the Association of Consulting Engineers, the body that sits above the likes of Stantec, etc., etc. You know, and we fed into them our thoughts, and they raised a paper on that earlier this year and published it, and that went to, I think, to the House of Commons as well. You know, so we're working with them. We've recently presented, my head of sustainability and my senior planners have recently presented to a county council, director of place and planning, and all of the boroughs and districts about it as well, in terms of our placemaking, our thoughts around that. And Victoria Hills, the chief executive of the RTPI, asked us to do that, you know, because we're recognised as leading this industry now on that and where we're going and what we're doing, etc. But it does require a more joined up approach. I think the HBF is trying to get there with what it's doing with the Future Homes Task Force, and I think making good progress. You know, and on there we've got most of the government departments, we've got the NGOs, we've got the different bodies that sit there, but it does require all of us to be putting towards in the same direction, unless we get the government really start to push us on it. But they've pushed automotive, and I don't think we're that far before they do push us. So it's best we do get on with it and move it along. Yeah.
Rob, can I just come back on biodiversity? Because you know, everyone loves a hedgehog house.
Yeah.
But I do worry that biodiversity to a lot of people it's not meaningful. You know, I mean, I as a councillor, I've got some residents at the moment who are getting very angry about the genuine wildlife in the local nature reserves. Like, there's no real wildlife. How do you get past it being about plonking some trees on the entrance and offering people a hedgehog house? You've got to go. It's got to be real biodiversity gain, hasn't it? How do you cross that?
So I mean, you are absolutely right there, you know. And I think the first thing is it has to start right at the very start in the inception of planning a scheme. So traditionally, what we've done in our industries, we've used master planners that are architectural master planners, and they tend to traditionally start with a road layout and then fill houses in. So we start from a slightly different perspective. We start with our landscape master planner. Okay, and our landscape master planner, the first thing we then do is map the natural asset we have. So what have we got in terms of trees? What have we got in terms of rivers, streams? Where are those biodiversity rich pieces of the land that we've got? And how do we design around those? We then bring the traditional master planner together with that landscape master planner, put the two things together, and we design in complementing each other. And I think that's the first thing I say is you have to understand what asset you've got, understand what the ability to prove that asset is, that natural asset in terms of environment. And if you can work that through and bring it, the two things match well together. And actually, our belief is people want that environment around them. They want to live in an environment where they do have exposure to, you know, all different species, you know, wild birds, you know, bees, trees, all the different bits and pieces. You know, and we have so much. A lot of our schemes are very rich with it there. If we look at it at the start, work out how to work with it, to grow it, to enhance it, to develop it, and then build our scheme to complement it, it can be done. But you have to start right at the start. You know, we've got schemes where we're putting 4.2 kilometres worth of new hedgerows in across the scheme to create biodiversity corridors. We're putting in, you know, and recharging rivers where they for whatever reason have been culverted or they've eroded, etc. We put them back in and make them work properly. We're working to reintroduce species back that haven't been there for a long time. You know, and we have to respect what we've got in terms of the natural environment. Ancient woodland has to be protected. You know, but the opportunities there, but also educating people. So we launched our Eddie and Ellie environment program going into schools, where we sponsor, we pay for, we work in conjunction with the local education authority, the Wildlife Trust, and we pay for education officers to go into year 3 and educate them on it. We pay for them to have a whole exposure for a 2-year program, come to our sites, go to wildlife centres and tie the whole thing together. But it is about that education, it's about moving that through. And you have to do it across the whole development process, right from the very start of inception. Yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question. It's a bit of a follow-up of Vicky's in terms of she was going into detail on biodiversity net gain. It's fantastic to have heard a little bit about how you're working with all the different stakeholders and trying to really tackle the challenge of net zero carbon. But for a layperson, could you perhaps explain how you're approaching it for development and what's the design and the solutions that you're looking at? I thought that'd be quite useful to hear.
Okay, so there are different elements. The first element is what we refer to as zero carbon in lifetime use. So that is when you've moved in, is the property zero carbon? Does it demand energy to heat it as such and to run? And that should be zero carbon. So it should have no external energy demand for that. So the first thing that we do is we, utilising the fabric of the building, we look to minimise that carbon demand as much as possible. And our standard house builders, we sit here today with no bolt-ons, no PV panels or air source heat pumps or anything else. Our standard house as we sit here today is 48% of the way to that zero carbon journey. And that is achieved by good build, by good insulation, by heat recovery. So we move the warm thermally heated room out of the south facing room and swap it with the north facing room, purifying a roof, etc. So that's the standard thing today. The next stage for us is air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, infrared heating, PV panels, all those bits and pieces, and bolting those on. But we're doing that in stages. We have a program to add those bits in stages, so that by the time we get to the 1st of Jan 25, every house, when you move into it, there will be no bill associated with heating that home. So that's the first thing. The second big challenge for us is getting the house to be carbon neutral in its build. And this is the bit where electric vehicles suffer, because they're massively carbon intensive to construct them, the battery, etc. So we've looked at the process. When we started this process 2.5 years ago, most of our supply chain couldn't tell us what the carbon value was of what it was they were supplying us with. And actually, we've still got a percentage of those that can't, and we're taking on that journey. We've had to educate them, show them, introduce them to the right people to measure that, etc. But our goal is to reduce down as much as possible the carbon footprint of the materials we use, and then to mitigate either by inset planting on our own sites and other measures on our own sites to mitigate it, or offsetting other schemes locally. And there, clearly starting with a timber frame house is massively important, because it's sucking that carbon in during the trees growing. So that starts with a really good negative value, as opposed to concrete or something like that has a massive carbon footprint the day you put it down. So, through its construction. So that's the next stage for us. And we're working through those two things and educating people on the journey as well. But yeah, it's doable. We can build zero carbon houses today in terms of lifetime use. Its current cost is about 8-10% more than a standard house. That cost will come down over the next few years. And we'll get more efficient at doing it as well.
Can I ask, Rob? It's always brilliant to hear your enthusiasm and to listen to what you're doing, because I don't, honest to God, I don't listen. I don't hear it much from anyone else in the same enthusiasm and drive that you've got. What I'm interested in is everyone should love you as you walk in the door. All the other developments, all the campaigners, they must sort of just put their placards down and go, it's Thakeham, it's all right, it's Rob, it's fine. We've just been the luckiest community in the world. Thakeham have decided to build it. It's not going to be anyone else. How are you finding the relationship in this world where NIMBYs and YIMBYs and everyone else are involved in the decision making? Are you being recognised? Are people recognising the value that you're putting into your developments, or is that do we still have a long way to go in winning over people that there is a better way?
I mean, there is still a massive scepticism attached to our industry. I think, let's face facts. We can't change years and years of behaviour overnight. And I think, when we rock up in a lot of places, the default position on day one is here we go, as you'd expect traditionally. I think we work very hard to educate and to try and show people that we are doing it differently. And here's examples of that. Please go and visit them. Please see this. Please see that. Not least engaging sometimes with Cratus to help us on that one as well. But fundamentally, it's still that journey. We're still moving along that. There is a basic NIMBYism. It's very rare that we get people we're immediately backing onto that want us to be there. Of course, we accept that. But, where we can really show that we're bringing a tangible benefit to the community. And it's not just about, and I think Vicky made the point earlier about, it's not just about building the lives of the houses that we're building for. Actually, we need to really think about how we impact the lives of the wider community, what we're doing with them, and how we can improve what they've got, and hopefully through education, through consultation, through showing them what we can do, and offering benefits and advantages to them too. Are they currently travelling 2 hours? Are they currently travelling 20 minutes, 3 miles in a car to a primary school when the new one will be half a mile away and a much better standard? That improves potentially somebody's life locally that exists at the moment, and it's getting that benefit across and educating on that's really important too.
It's tough in any planning application, and you're right. As you turn up, it's like, here we go again, ready for the punch up. But what I'm interested in about as well, and we've talked about hypocrites and heroes, and you can actually be doing the right thing and in fact be a hypocrite in doing that. I do wonder whether communities have got to recognise the efforts that are starting to come through and being led by particularly your business and the HBO, that you can't say no to everything, and you have to welcome the people that are bringing it forward. It's one of those things, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't keep the world in aspect. We have to have that one thing. And I think there's a real tension building for a lot of developers who are trying to follow your footsteps, with particularly the environmental lobby that are asking for things that actually are inhibiting people like yourself. Do you think that that's a fair view, that the environmental lobby actually has to step back and encourage you and look to help you?
So you're absolutely right. We do a lot of work at the moment with Surrey Wildlife Trust, and Surrey are of the opinion that it's better to work with and try and partner up and work together and educate each other and take it forwards than to just be against. And we've got Wildlife Trust where as soon as we turn up and wave our flag, we want to do something, that's it. We are, the devil. We are the worst thing that can possibly arrive. And actually, you summed it up earlier. The housing is coming. Local authorities do have a housing number they have to deliver, and that is coming. Now, you have a choice. You either do that in a controlled manner, as a local authority, picking the right schemes and setting the pace on what you want from biodiversity, from carbon net zero, and the right behavioural pattern. Or you accept that you just accept any old whatever, and it just gets put in. Or worse than that, you ultimately are at the behest of a 5-year supply, and people are just putting it in and not caring at all. And I think it's there's this discord, isn't there? If we say no, it won't happen. Well, that's not going to be the case, is it? If you say no, it's going to turn up. So actually, I think Surrey Wildlife Trust lead where, well, let's work together. Let's work with developers and prove to others and educate councils that they can have what they want. They can have a great scheme that delivers all these benefits. We delivered a scheme in Boughton, completed last year, had it independently measured by Surrey Wildlife Trust, and we achieved a 41.38% biodiversity net gain. Now that's through working through it properly in that community and delivering the right thing. But the default still is quite simply we don't want to hear. We've got a major Boughton Horsham district at the moment on the scheme. It's 3,500 homes. It's a big new community, and yeah, we've got some big environmental wrangles on that going. Not on our scheme. There's nothing local to us that has any form of designation. There's a big rewilding project near, and they're saying that we're going to ruin X, Y, and Z. But actually, we can prove that we're doing the complete opposite. But it's a choice. We've not exposed ourselves to that being Horsham residents. We've not tried to do anything in Horsham district before. But if we just sit here accepting that the big PLC is going to turn up and keep smashing us with everything that has no value, what place are we going to end up with? And sooner or later, we have to step in and try and deliver the right thing, which we've done. And it's a battle. It's quite good fun, I guess, in a diverse way. But we want to educate. We want to change. We want to show what can be delivered and do it the right way, definitely.
Yeah, this is Nick. This is something Jenny probably wouldn't say, but she's actually working on something extremely relevant to this, which is about how you measure overall benefit to a community, rather than seeing the benefit to a community being, measured in only those things that you can quantify, and typically those are around the sort of hard economics or cars or whatever it may be. But actually, if you could value the biodiversity net gain, if you could value the community benefit of the Butcher's Boy scheme or the community shop or whatever it might be, then the transformation that new communities could be bringing to existing communities, you could start measuring that.
Yeah.
And that seems to, could you see that being a measure that could help us, accelerate the way in which good development is being done?
So I think you're absolutely right, and one of the things that we saw through Healthy New Towns programme was that there was a practice down in, I think it was Bristol way, that had collated 26,000 surveys worldwide and the results of it, and were able to prove and show what the value of certain things was on people's health, and they're measurable from poundage point of view. So in other words, quite apt at the moment is air quality. What's the effect of good air quality versus bad air quality on somebody's health, their life, etc. The same with noise pollution. The same with the ability to step outside your front door and to see, trees, green spaces, to have access to that, and proper access to that. What's your ability to walk to what's important to you? A, from a fitness point of view, but also B, not to have to get in the car and go through that rigmarole of sitting in traffic to get somewhere. So the ability to take the kids to school and be able to walk to a local school, the ability to get on your bike and go somewhere nice that doesn't interact or threatened by a car. There's all of these things, a value can be put to that, and I think it's hugely important if we're creating places, we're doing it. And I don't understand why it's not, that piece of work's not gone further. Ultimately somebody's going to pick up the bill. It's going to be some form of social care cost. It's going to have, an effect. The bit of work we're doing with the county council at the moment is looking at the impact we can have through community creation on social and health inequality. Well, ultimately, if it's a good impact, it will lessen the expenditure of that local authority through time. Because the community cares for itself. Somebody notices Ethel, the 78-year-old, had a fall, it gets dealt with much sooner, etc., etc. The value of educating and working with each other. So I think it's a massive piece of work. And if we could join up and really show the benefits to the existing community, not just the new community, then people would be far more accepting, I think.
Well, I think there's also one of the things that I'm very minded of is that we have to encourage the objectors, the people who want a better community, to also not. For me, I'll always accept an objector says that they're going to write and they're going to be complaining, and they say fine. Now, in the meantime, would you like to work with us on the project? And it's trying to get them to put aside their first decision of you're a bad person, and then sit down and talk to the professionals that you've got working with you to make them realise that actually there's a lot of sincerity, a lot of thought going there. Because we do have to get to the point where people like yourselves are encouraged to do it, and more people follow you, Rob. I know this might be annoying that you're going to have people following you, but we actually need to get more people talking the story that you've been sharing with us. And as a final piece, I've always found it interesting, having worked with you over the years, that estate agency that we started talking about at the beginning, I've always thought one of the USPs that you have is you see the finished house being advertised in the newspaper and what it's going to say to the member of the public about this home. And you've gone from building homes to building a whole new community in a very sincere sense. And I think that Pease Pottage is one that we're looking forward to visiting. And we're looking forward to all the other schemes coming through. But more power to you, Elba, and we really do want you to come back, because that was a fantastic contribution to this programme.
A tour de force.
Absolutely brilliant. So we're all looking forward to the next opportunity to work for. But that was really a great thing, and thank you very much. Jenny, leading on, I've created some time so we're not leaving it until the last minute. But you're going to take us through the latest policy announcements, as Keith is not speaking for you on this occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it nice and brief, but instead of kind of policy, it's a little bit more of legislation, a little bit of a news update as well, because there's not actually been a huge amount going on in terms of policies and strategies recently, and we're still awaiting a lot in the months coming up to COP26. So watch this space on that. But one of the reasons it was quite quiet in the last month or so is because of the local elections, which I won't go into because I'm by no means the local politics expert on this webinar. But in summary, Conservative won a lot more seats, Labour lost. And I was particularly interested, because I live in Bristol, to find that we've now got equal number of Green and Labour councillors which is going to be quite interesting to see how that plays out, including an 18-year-old councillor. So yeah, we'll see. We did, however, have the Queen's speech on the 11th of May. There wasn't a huge amount of new information coming out, but a couple of recaps in relation to environmental related legislation. This year we've got the planning bill upcoming, which will put in place the changes from the planning for the future white paper. I'm quite interested to see the implications of sustainability appraisals being abolished and simplified sustainable development tests for local plans. I must confess I don't know too much about how that's going to impact at this stage, but quite interesting to think about how that could affect the way that local plans are developed and delivered. One other aspect to note is obviously the upcoming environmental bill. Rob has done a fantastic job of explaining biodiversity net gain, so I don't really need to go into that too much. But one of the points, and Rob has highlighted this as well, which is quite interesting, is that it's already become established practice before it's actually reached the statute book. But yeah, so watch this space on biodiversity net gain. And the bill will also set long-term and legally binding environmental targets. I know that on this webinar, the panelists have differing views on whether we do need targets and how helpful they are, but obviously, hopefully we'll see some progress from them. And finally, the main thing I wanted to talk about was that DEFRA have actually now launched tree and peatland action plans for England last week. One thing that I found out, which I wasn't aware of, is there's now new evidence and analysis on land use change and the emissions associated with peatlands. Hopefully everyone's aware that they can be huge carbon sinks, but the new analysis shows that they're actually emitting a lot in the UK. So we've got a long way to go in terms of restoration. There's a bit of scrutiny around the targets associated with these plans, and basically it looks like it's slightly rehashed and no increase in terms of tree planting or peatland restoration. One point is that the government's going to spend about 50 million on restoring around 35,000 hectares of peatland by 2025. Well, what does that mean? Apparently that's only 5% of England's total peat soils and 1% of the UK total. Not to say that it could be good progress to start restoring, but I think we've obviously got a long way to go on that.
It is good though, isn't it, that the government, that we are now not going to be able to buy peat in our compost, because ultimately it's about the end user. As of May, we can't buy these horrible coals anymore, and now we're not going to be able to buy the peat from the garden centres. So the end user is we're going to see those changes, which hopefully will feed back to the environmental improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. It is good news. It is good news. And the final thing I was going to note, because I've more given just a bit of a news update there and ending on a weather point. And Rob mentioned that the water is falling out the sky on a daily basis, which it currently absolutely is here in the UK. But I found out a bit of a shocking stat about what's actually happening in the Arctic at the moment. And apparently the Arctic has reached temperatures of plus 30 degrees, which is apparently a bit mind-boggling for this time of year, where it's normally 20 to 24 degrees. Sorry, it's 20 to 24 degrees hotter than the average for this time of year. So a little bit shocking, and hopefully we'll see some sun here in the UK soon. That's
a huge problem. The political point, I think, is really interesting for me, because I'm going to mention a B word, but I'm going to bring it back to the environmental issue. If you were campaigning in an area that supported Brexit, and you had no narrative about your political vision of how beneficial that was going to be, then you came out very badly. And what I think that in Hartlepool that was a big issue, that one party, the party that was defending it, didn't have a strong message about the opportunity, and the other party that was fighting it said it's wonderful, it's going to be great, all this is going to be happening. And it made me realise that we're moving into a world where if you don't have a conversation about something, you're missing out on engaging with the public. And I do wonder whether COP26, when it comes, is going to be a changer, where if you don't have a zero carbon conversation, if you don't have the policies and the belief in how to deal with climate change, that actually progressively in future elections, because what happened in Bristol, and this is where I get back to what you actually said, is Bristol the Greens came second in the mayoralty, and they are the second largest party on the council. That's really impressive. Now, Bristol's always had a desire to show its green credentials. That's always been there, and of all places for it to happen. But that's pushed two other more established parties out of the way. And while Vicky may not feel too comfortable with this, the Green Party has become second in some progressive areas where Labour are first, and the Liberal Democrats have been moved. So the Green issue, I think, one of the underlying issues about the local government elections this year was you started to see the power of the Green debate starting to influence politics in our local government. And I think that that's just nice and gently, but COP could be another reason for that to be elevated up higher. London, amazing performance, third candidate in London, and well on to her because she's one of the better candidates in being articulate about what she believed. But it's a really interesting change. So moving on to that, I think that we've got a bit of a mishmash at the end of hero and hypocrite. And for Vicky, it was politically unpalatable to even raise the names of the people. So, Johnny, are you going to start this off?
Yeah, well, I will do, because I think it segues very nicely onto the concept of message, Nick. And so this, something that goes through my head a lot is, why have I got more wrinkles in my forehead? And I attribute it very much to the AI news bots that throw stuff into my inbox. I'm constantly either furrowing my eyebrows or raising them like that. Oh my God, and this was a Reuters article, but then also Guardian pointing out Nigel Farage had been appointed as an advisor to the Dutch Green Business Group as an advisor on carbon offsets. As a business, they provide carbon offsets and nature-based solutions. And my immediate reaction was one of furrow, one of surprise, as I continually do. But for me, I think what's really interesting, and there's no point in waxing lyrical about Mr. Farage and why the irony of that is irony in itself. It's the message, since the Greta effect and Attenborough's effect in terms of the messages they get out. I think it's really interesting that we will see over the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years the message on climate change, the benefits of nature-based solutions, the benefits of direct carbon removal will come from a whole range of different people who we're probably not aligned to today, but will be aligned to in the future. And as you know, as a communication consultancy, Nick and Vicky, I'm really interested in your views of who gives the message appears to be as equal, if not more important than the message itself. Because don't forget, the IPCC's first report came out in 1990. That was 30 years ago. Yet the message is only starting to fall on the fertile soil now. So what is it about the message, the giver of the message, that's so important?
It is that irony, isn't it? A few years ago, Nigel Farage had said, snow is the proof that there is no global, climate change, and yet, a few years later, he's seen. I suppose it's about you. The message has got to match the person who is receiving that message. And there is no point Greta Thunberg or me or somebody who is seen as a lefty trying to get that message through to somebody who thinks that Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson are, that they're best buddies that they'll go down the pub with. It's got to be somebody that they will listen to. And as awful as that is, if my dad will listen to Nigel Farage, then go on, then let's send Nigel Farage round with the message, because as long as my dad gets the message, that's what I'm caring about. And I think we have to recognise that you have got to put the message in a form and through a vehicle that is seen as safe. And I will have to eat humble pie if my dad comes round to the idea because Nigel Farage says so.
Well, I think that I don't know, Keith, if you want to add anything, because we're coming up to the end of our hour.
It's all right. I'll save my Grant Shapps piece.
I think let's save Grant, because it's worth keeping Grant for later. But the ironies of ironies, that Nigel Farage could be a hero of the Green movement, could be something that will shock us forever. But Vicky, thank you for stopping short of saying I'll eat my hat. because a previous Liberal did have to eat their hat.
That was a bad night for me that you said that.
A very bad night. Look, thank you to Rob, really brilliant, Rob, for coming on and sharing so brilliantly all of that, and with all your competitors. And I hope that they were listening, and I hope at the time. We have been in an extraordinary year. I think that with the pandemic, there has been a sea change where people's ears and eyes are more open to the world in which they live. And I think that a lot of people a year ago would have been going, oh, that's quite fanciful, really, isn't it? That's lovely, Rob. And actually now they're starting to say, quite like the idea of living there. So thank you so much for that. To the team, it's been brilliant, as ever. Lovely to see everyone. Stantec and Cratus do this because we have a great time. But we're also doing this because we really want to contribute to the conversation. And I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you're watching live, thank you so much for finding the time. If you're watching it on our new YouTube channel, brilliant. Thank you. Tell other people. But also do get in contact with us, because we're going to start ramping things up going to COP26. There are events that Stantec are doing, and we've been allowed to come along and join in, which is lovely. But, you know, this is a really important thing for all of us, taking part in these events. So thank you for your time. See you next month, and tell us what you want next. Thank you.